The converse of the Pythagorean theorem lesson. So in the previous lesson we discussed Pythagorean theorem, which says that if we have two legs of a right triangle and its hypotenuse, then the two legs added together, once you squared them, a squared plus b squared, should equal the hypotenuse squared. Now the converse of that, remember the converse of the statement is just flip-flopped, should be if a squared plus b squared equals c squared, then this must be a right triangle. So instead of looking for a side, you're going to be deciding if it's a right triangle or not. So if this is a right triangle, the hypotenuse would be 25, that's the longest side. So if you put it into the Pythagorean theorem, you have a squared plus b squared, and that should equal c squared. I'm just going to leave that blank because we don't know if it equals. I'm going to switch to white. I can't really see that red. Sorry if you can't. So this is 225 plus 400, and you could do all that in one step in your calculator. And 25 squared is 625. Add those together, you get 625. And so instead of putting a blank, we decide if one is bigger than the other or if they're equal, and they are equal. So yes, it's a right triangle. So pause it and see if you can do these. Sorry, I always forget to leave it blank. So that's how you should have set them up. On this one you get 289 and 289, so those are equal, so that's a yes. And on this one, I know you get a no, but let me just do the math real fast. 16 squared plus 21 squared is 697, and this is 576, I believe. So that is not equal, so that's a no. So we have a right triangle's right here in the middle, and let's see. Let me try to actually pull up the notes version. This is what your paper looks like. This might be a little easier. So if a squared plus b squared equals c squared, everything's the same, so it makes a right angle. So when they're equal, it makes a 90-degree angle right here. Now, if you'll notice, if this angle gets smaller, like right here, if it goes from being a right angle to where this side comes down a little bit and it's smaller, C would also have to get smaller. So if you look at the hypotenuse of this and then the long side of this one, those are not the same. This one's gotten smaller. So C squared is smaller. That means the angle is less, well actually let me say angle is smaller than 90 degrees. So I usually don't say all this, but if a lot of people are like, so what if a squared plus b squared is bigger? And I always say ignore that. Always think about C. If C is bigger, the angle's bigger. If C is smaller, the angle's smaller. And I usually don't say smaller than 90, but most people from smaller can get acute and from bigger can get obtuse. So if C squared is bigger than the other side, then the angle, oh I forgot my arrow, the angle is bigger. But I'll go ahead and add than 90 degrees. And C is always going to be the longest side. Okay. I guess I can switch back to the better notes here. Hopefully. And as you notice, as that angle gets bigger, that side obviously gets smaller or bigger, and then when the angle's smaller, that side gets smaller. And it does say C is the length of the longest side. This is the actual theorem. Okay, so first we have to tell if the measures can be the side lengths of a triangle, and if they can, then we have to decide if it's acute, obtuse, or right. And actually I'm going to switch back to the others because I like the lines drawn on y'all's paper. Okay, so you won't have to actually do this first part on your homework, but I wanted you to see it because it's so similar. If you'll remember, when we decide if it's a triangle, you add the two smaller sides together, and they must be bigger than the third side. And what we're doing today is very similar, except for you would just square them all. So I want you to see them separated. So we get 12 is bigger than 10. So yes, it's a triangle. So once it's a triangle, then we determine if it's acute, obtuse, or right. If it's not a triangle, you just put not a triangle and you move on because it couldn't be anything. So since it's a triangle, now we do the two smaller sides squared and added together. And I'm going to leave that blank and put 10 squared. So 25 plus 49 blank 100. So we get 74 on this side, 100 on this side. So is c squared bigger or smaller? It is bigger. When c is big, the angle's big, and it is obtuse. So we see if these make a triangle, and yes, they do. And you don't necessarily have to write this step, because like I said, I'm not going to ask you to do that on your homework. I just need you to see the difference in seeing if it's a triangle and then seeing if it's acute, right, or obtuse. So that does make a triangle, so then we're going to do 8 squared plus 9 squared, 10 squared. So we get 100 on this side, 64 plus 81, 145, sorry about my weird one. So c squared is actually smaller this time, and when c squared is smaller, the angle is smaller and it is acute. So I'd like you to pause it and do the remaining 4 problems if you can. I'm going to do them kind of quickly, so I'd like you to try them and then play it and check them. So that makes a triangle. 7 squared plus 12 squared, and then 16 squared. I know 16 squared is 256, and you can type that whole thing in your calculator. Let me bring up my calculator. Oh no, my calculator's not ready. Alright, so when you do 7 squared plus 12 squared in your calculator, you get 193. I'll do that on the next one. So c squared is bigger. C is bigger, the angle's bigger, and it is obtuse. On this one, you actually get 13 is bigger than 17, which is not true, so these are not a triangle. So you don't even have to solve it. Now on this one, you got to be careful with radicals, because first of all, when you square them, you have to square this whole thing. So before we've done stuff like radical 85 squared, which is just 85. But if we do 11 radical 2 squared, you have to square the 11, get 121, then square the radical 2 and get just 2, and then you multiply them together. Now, I'm fine with you doing it in your calculator, but you've got to be able to put parentheses around the whole thing so it squares it. And I'll show you how I would do that. But first we have to determine which side's the longest side. Now hopefully you know 11 radical 2 is bigger than 11, but if you don't, you always would type the radical in, and that is 15.6, so that's bigger than 11. So let's decide if 11 plus 11 is greater than 15.6, whatever. So 22 is bigger, so that's yes, so it does make a triangle. Now we're going to do 11 squared plus 11 squared, and then do 11 radical 2 squared. So here's my best advice. I would type in 11 radical 2 like this and hit enter and get this answer. Then we know how much it is and we can decide if it's the longest side. Then I would immediately hit this x squared button and it should say ans squared. That is saying it's going to square your last answer. So it's going to take the whole thing and square it. And you get 242. Sorry, I know you can't see that. So I'm going to write 242 here. But I'm going to go back to the calculator because I want to show you. Let me see if I can fit this whole thing in here. Maybe, maybe not. Okay, so if I just type in 11 radical 2 squared. The problem with that, well, first of all, with this part is that it's going to be under the parentheses, or under the radical. But if you somehow manage to get that outside and you hit squared, all it does is square the 2 there, and then it multiplies it by the 11. Because it does exponents before it multiplies these two together. So to type it in correctly, you'd have to do 11 radical 2, arrow out, close the parentheses, and then hit squared. But there are some of you that have the older calculators that automatically open parentheses under here, and if it does that, then you've got to double close the parentheses, and it's just easier if you just type it in, hit enter, get this decimal, and then hit squared. I would do that every time. That's what I do. So 11 plus 11, that's 121 plus 121, which is 242. This is 242. Those are equal, so this is a right triangle. On this one, 2 radical 21. That is 9.2 roughly. So if this is about, that sign means about, 9.2, that means 10 is the longest side. Is 5 plus about 9.2 going to be bigger than 10? Yes, so it will make a triangle. So we've got to do 5 squared plus 2 radical 21 squared, and then do the blank and 10 squared. No, this is 100. And then I'm just going to go back here. I'm just going to hit the squared button. That's what that is, squared. So then we do 5 squared plus, and I'm just going to do plus the 84. You get 109. So this is really 25 plus 84. But you get, sorry, now I've got this all messed up. 109 and 100. This is bigger, so if c squared is smaller, the angle is smaller and it is acute. And I believe that's it.